In January of 1918, 15 ships were crossing the North Atlantic. 800 men witnessed something that should never have existed, something that governments classified in less than 2 days, something that, according to official records, never happened. Tonight, I'm going to show you the testimony that was sealed, the evidence that was suppressed, and the pattern of deaths that for over a century nobody has dared to investigate. In January of 1918, the world was in the final year of World War I. The War of the Trenches, the one that had devastated Europe for 4 years, had a front that most people forget about, the North Atlantic. German submarines, known as U-boats, had sunk over 2,000 Allied ships since 1914. Great Britain depended on supplies coming in from America, and every ocean crossing was a gamble with survival. To counter that threat, a convoy system was put in place in 1917, merchant ships traveling in groups protected by Royal Navy escorts. On January 16, 1918, convoy HX-17 was leaving Halifax in the province of Nova Scotia, bound for Liverpool, England. 12 merchant ships, 3 Royal Navy destroyers, 800 men total, crossing 3,000 miles of open ocean. Conditions that night were completely normal. Continuous cloud cover, light winds from the northwest. The sea was calm, visibility of 4 nautical miles, limited by persistent fog and low clouds. Nothing about that setup pointed to what was about to happen. The lead ship of the convoy was the SS Cambrian Star, sitting in first position of the first column. Her captain was William J. Hartley, 52 years old. He'd gone to sea at 14, 38 years of experience in the merchant navy. He'd completed 11 Atlantic crossings during the war, all of them through waters crawling with enemy submarines. His crew described him as methodical, precise, and completely reliable under pressure. That night, Hartley was on the bridge with his first officer, Arthur Kelly, and navigator, Stephen Ward. The night watch hadn't reported anything unusual, 0 contacts of any kind. Then, at 3:47 in the morning, Hartley watched the water change. What those 800 men aboard that convoy witnessed in the next 4 minutes was documented, classified, and erased from the official record before noon. And what happened after that is exactly why none of the men who saw it were free to talk again. 200 meters off the port side of the SS Cambrian Star, the surface of the ocean started to move. Not from waves, not from wind, from something rising up from the bottom. Captain Hartley's testimony, recorded in the joint report that all 15 captains signed and that was transmitted through official channels to the Admiralty at 6 that same morning, describes the moment like this. A luminous mass emerged vertically over the course of approximately 45 seconds. The object rose to roughly 9 meters above the waterline. Then it stopped. It hung there, motionless, hovering over the water. Its shape was cylindrical. Captain Blackwood of the HMS Dorado described its outline as irregular, as if the surface wasn't entirely solid. The light it produced was white, uniform across its entire visible surface, and bright enough to illuminate the surrounding ocean. Navigator Stephen Ward kept a personal diary for years. That diary was discovered during an estate sale of a family in London in 2011 and was donated to the Imperial War Museum in 2014. In that diary, Ward logged what he observed that night. The light wasn't coming from a single point. The entire surface of the object was luminous. It was like nothing he could recall in 30 years at sea. Captain Pemberton of the SS Northern Light estimated the object was somewhere between 12 and 18 meters long, comparable to the size of a large destroyer. And it was completely silent. This was the element that unsettled the witnesses most consistently. Several captains specifically addressed the absence of sound in their reports. Captain Pemberton wrote that the object produced no audible sound whatsoever. Given its size and the intensity of its light, that silence was the single most inexplicable element of the entire observation. The convoy itself was generating a constant drone from its engines. The sound of wind and waves was non-stop across the Atlantic. This object, 9 meters above the water, less than a quarter mile from the nearest ship, produced nothing. Total silence.
At 3:51, 4 minutes after the object first emerged, the electromagnetic interference began. Every magnetic compass on every ship in the convoy started spinning at the same time. Not fluctuating, not drifting, spinning, fast, continuously, with no way to lock onto a heading. Lieutenant Henry R. Thornton, navigator aboard the HMS Dorado, documented the phenomenon in real time. His records, reconstructed from fragments recovered in the National Archives of Great Britain, described the compass spinning non-stop, unable to hold a stable bearing. The gyroscopic instruments were affected too. Navigation was completely knocked out. Radio communications failed at that exact same moment. The signals officer aboard the HMS Swift attempted to transmit a status report. The transmission didn't go through. He tried again 2 minutes later. Nothing. Every single piece of wireless equipment on all 15 ships went dead simultaneously. For 20 minutes, 15 ships carrying 800 men had no working compasses, no navigation capability, and no way to communicate with each other or with the Admiralty, right in the middle of the most dangerous stretch of ocean on the planet. During those 20 minutes, the object moved. According to Captain Blackwood's report, it first shifted laterally, parallel to the convoy's heading, at roughly 8 knots. Then it stopped. Then it accelerated in a direction perpendicular to the convoy at a speed Blackwood estimated at no less than 30 knots. No surface vessel of any nation in 1918 could hit 30 knots from a dead stop. The fastest destroyers of the era needed several minutes of sustained acceleration to even reach that speed. This object covered that distance instantaneously. At approximately 3:55, the object began to descend. Captain Hartley's description is precise. It descended vertically at a steady, controlled rate. There was no disturbance at the point of entry, no splash, no wave, no displacement. It didn't sink the way a ship sinks. It descended as if the ocean itself was receiving it. The descent took 30 seconds. The moment the object disappeared beneath the surface, every compass in the convoy stabilized simultaneously. Every radio came back online at that exact same instant.
The HMS Swift transmitted a report to the Admiralty at 4:12. The Admiralty acknowledged receipt at 4:18. That acknowledgement contained a single instruction: maintain radio silence on this matter until further notice. At dawn on January 16th, all 15 captains began drafting a joint report, an unprecedented collective act that required unanimous agreement among the commanding officers of the Allied merchant fleets. All 15 captains signed that document, putting down exactly what 800 men had witnessed. The Admiralty received the joint report at 2 p.m. on January 16, 1918. Classification was ordered at 2:48 p.m. No response was sent back to the captains. No questions were asked. The report does not appear in any Admiralty file accessible to the public. But what the Admiralty did with that report was only the beginning. What happened to the men who signed it is what changes the meaning of everything you've heard up to this point. Hit subscribe if you want to understand why a government classified a testimony signed by 15 captains in under 3 hours. Because what's coming next reveals that classification wasn't the only step they took to guarantee silence. Convoy HX-17 arrived in Liverpool on January 22, 1918. Within the next 48 hours, officers from the Naval Intelligence Division were on the docks. Every captain was interviewed individually. The sessions lasted between 2 and 5 hours. A Liverpool dock worker named Thomas Whitfield, who spoke with Captain Hartley after his interview, recalled years later that Hartley came out of that meeting completely shaken. They took everything from him: his records, his personal notes, his sketches from the crossing. He walked out of that building with nothing in his hands. All written documents from the 15 ships were confiscated. The ship logs for January 16th were removed from official records. Personal diaries, letters, and any document referencing the event were seized. Captain Pemberton of the SS Northern Light pushed back against the confiscation of his personal diary. 2 members of his crew, interviewed decades later in the 1960s, confirmed that Pemberton was told his merchant's license would be revoked if he kept it up. He didn't push back again. All 15 captains were given orders to maintain absolute silence about what happened. The official position, communicated through the Naval Intelligence Division, was that the incident had been investigated and determined to be a natural magnetic phenomenon caused by submarine activity in the area. The records of the German submarines, captured after the war and filed away in the National Archives of Great Britain, show no U-boat operation within 200 nautical miles of Convoy HX-17's position on January 16, 1918. No submarine was identified in that sector on that date. The official explanation doesn't hold up. The deaths started within 2 weeks. Captain Thomas R. Ashford, 48 years old, commander of the SS Atlantic Dawn, the second ship in the convoy. Ashford had documented the event in his personal diary, which was seized by the Naval Intelligence Division on January 24th, but he'd written a letter to his wife in Bristol that was mailed from Liverpool on January 23rd, 1 day before the seizure.
The letter arrived home on January 26th. In it, Ashford wrote that something happened during the crossing that he couldn't explain and that he'd been told not to talk about. He added that he wasn't sure silence was going to be enough. Captain Ashford was admitted to the Royal Infirmary in Bristol on February 2nd. His symptoms were logged as acute gastric illness. He died on February 6, 1918. Official cause? Complications from influenza. His medical file, partially released through a formal request in 2003, describes him at the time of admission as coherent and rational in every respect, and flags an unusual and persistent preoccupation with events during his most recent Atlantic crossing. His wife reported that in the days before his hospitalization, a man in civilian clothes showed up outside their home on 3 consecutive nights. No investigation into Captain Ashford's death was ever carried out. His belongings from the crossing were never returned to his family. First Officer James Fletcher, 34 years old, served aboard the HMS Dorado, the primary escort vessel. Fletcher had been on the bridge for the entire event. His personal diary was seized during the interrogation on January 24th. He tried to send a letter to his sister before the interrogation. The letter was intercepted. Fletcher wrote to his sister on January 28th after the interrogation. They'd made it clear to him what happened to men who talked about what they saw. He added that he had no intention of finding out firsthand. On July 9, 1918, during a patrol operation off the coast of Ireland, First Officer Fletcher was killed. Official cause: enemy sniper fire. A single shot. The patrol report documents that the trajectory of the round originated from approximately 600 meters, well within the effective range of a rifle. The trajectory placed the shooter on the British side of the patrol route, not the German side. No investigation into the origin of the shot was ever carried out. Fletcher's death was logged as enemy action. His belongings were never returned to his family. Sailor Robert Davies, 21 years old, served aboard the SS Cambrian Star. Davies had written a letter to his mother describing what he witnessed, mailed from Liverpool on January 24th. The letter arrived. His mother kept it for decades. It was discovered among her belongings after her death in 1963. A member of the family currently holds it privately and has refused to allow it to be published. Davies was admitted to No. 7 Casualty Clearing Station near Liverpool on March 3, 1918, with injuries sustained during what was logged as a training accident that had been reported. The surgeon who treated him requested an investigation. The request was denied.
3 witnesses dead in less than 2 months after the convoy's return. 3 deaths under circumstances the official record can't adequately account for. But not every attempt to preserve the truth was destroyed. The letter Ashford sent to his wife arrived 1 day before the Naval Intelligence Division could intercept it. His words survived. And decades later, the letter Davies wrote to his mother stayed tucked away with a family that didn't fully understand its significance, but kept it anyway. Those documents exist. They're proof that the men of that convoy knew what was coming for them because of what they saw. But Ashford, Fletcher, and Davies were just the first 3. What you're about to find out is a pattern that stretches across years, one that includes the investigators who tried to document it, and one that carries a statistical probability of occurring by chance of 9,000 to 1. Hit subscribe if these 3 deaths have already changed the way you're seeing this story. Because what comes next is where the pattern becomes something that's flat out impossible to explain away as coincidence.
Captain Edward M. Pemberton, 55 years old, commander of the SS Northern Light, the same captain who had pushed back against the confiscation of his diary. Pemberton survived the war. He returned to the merchant fleet in 1919. He never spoke publicly about Convoy HX-17. On March 14, 1920, while traveling by train from London to Bristol, Pemberton was killed at Swindon Junction Station. The official report states that he fell from the train while it was stopped at the platform. 2 witnesses on the platform, identified in the investigation records, stated they saw Pemberton standing moments before the incident. Neither one saw him move toward the edge. He died the following day at Bath Royal United Hospital. The investigation took 72 hours. Verdict: accidental death. Nothing in the investigation record makes any reference to Convoy HX-17 or the Atlantic crossing of January 1918. Navigator Samuel Hill, 21 years old, served aboard the SS Cambrian Star. Hill had logged the compass readings during the electromagnetic event. His observations were the most technically detailed in the entire convoy. Hill survived the war. In 1921, he returned to the Merchant Navy. On October 3, 1921, during a routine crossing in the English Channel, Hill disappeared from his ship during a period of dense fog. He was on watch. His replacement showed up for the scheduled shift change. Hill wasn't at his post. A search was carried out. His body was never recovered. He remains on record as missing.
Captain Arthur Whitmore, 44 years old, commander of the SS Crown of Scotland. Whitmore was visibly affected in the weeks following the convoy's return. Members of his crew reported that he refused to discuss the crossing and displayed what they described as a constant, relentless fear. In March of 1918, he was referred to the psychiatric hospital at Craiglockhart in Scotland. His medical file, partially declassified through a formal request in 2009, contains a psychiatric evaluation that states the patient was rational and coherent in all matters, showed no signs of shell shock or psychotic disorder, and that his account of events was internally consistent and detailed. However, the content of his testimony was deemed incompatible with known phenomena. Shell shock, a convenient diagnosis. Whitmore died at Craiglockhart on November 18, 1918, 7 days after the armistice. Official cause, complications from influenza. Hospital records indicate he'd been placed in isolation 2 weeks before his death. No visitors were permitted. Lieutenant Henry R. Thornton, 31 years old, navigator aboard the HMS Dorado, the same man who documented the electromagnetic interference in real time. On May 19, 1918, Thornton was put before a court-martial for desertion in the face of the enemy. The charge, abandoning his navigation post during a German engagement. Thornton's defense, recorded in the court-martial transcript that was sealed for 100 years, stated that he had left his post to observe an unidentified object that appeared above the convoy. No other officer corroborated his testimony, officially. He was executed by firing squad on May 19, 1918. The transcript was scheduled to be released in 2018 under the 100-year classification rule. When investigators requested access, the National Archives responded that the document could not be located in their current collections.
Signals Officer Andrew Moran, 21 years old, served aboard the HMS Swift. Moran had been the officer who attempted to transmit the report to the Admiralty during the event and who documented the total failure of communications in the ship's log. He survived the war. In October of 1918, during a routine inspection at the Portsmouth docks, Moran collapsed and was pronounced dead on the spot. Official cause, cardiac arrest. He was 21 years old. The doctor who attended him noted in his report that there was no history of heart disease and no indication of any pre-existing condition. No further investigation was carried out. Captain William J. Hartley, the primary witness, the man who first saw the object rise out of the ocean, the man who drafted the joint report that all 15 captains signed. Hartley survived the war. He returned to Liverpool at the end of 1918. He never went back to sea. In February of 1919, during a walk through the Liverpool dock area, a route he'd covered hundreds of times throughout his career, Captain Hartley fell from the wharf into the harbor. He was found the next day. The wharf had a railing. Witnesses in the area reported seeing no one else near Hartley at the time of the incident. The investigation lasted 40 minutes. Verdict: accidental death. Hartley's personal belongings, including any documents related to his career and his Atlantic crossings, were collected by individuals his widow described as men from London in civilian clothes. They were never returned. 9 witnesses dead, the man who first saw it among them. The case might have stayed buried forever if it weren't for Dr. Malcolm Ashton. Ashton was a maritime historian at the University of Bristol. In 1949, while researching U-boat operations in the Atlantic, he came across a single-line reference in an Admiralty dispatch log. Convoy HX-17, Anomalous Magnetic Report. Classified, January 16th, 1918.
That reference didn't match any known incident in the official record. Over the course of 3 years, Ashton tracked down 11 surviving crew members from Convoy HX-17. Their accounts, given independently with no communication between them since 1918, were consistent, detailed, and mutually corroborating. Ashton compiled his findings into a manuscript. 3 academic publishers rejected it without comment. He filed a formal declassification request. It was denied. On September 7, 1952, Dr. Malcolm Ashton was found dead in his study in Bristol. Official cause? Cardiac arrest. He was 47 years old, no prior history of heart disease. His manuscript was not found among his papers. It has never been recovered. His research notes did survive. They were discovered in 2014 during renovations at the University of Bristol Library, sealed inside a box mislabeled as Victorian Naval Correspondence. Professor George Whitfield, Imperial College London. In 1965, he began examining German naval archives that had been released by the Soviet Union after the Cold War. Those archives contained references to unidentified phenomena observed by U-boat crews in the North Atlantic during 1917 and 18. The descriptions matched the accounts from Convoy HX-17 with striking precision. In 1968, Whitfield presented his findings at a private symposium in London. 3 days later, he died of a heart attack in Hyde Park. He was 47 years old. His manuscript was not found among his papers. It has never been recovered. His research notes did survive. They were discovered in 2014 during renovations at the University of Bristol Library, sealed inside a box mislabeled as Victorian Naval Correspondence. 11 people dead, 9 of them directly connected to what they witnessed on January 16, 1918. 2 of them investigators who tried to put on record what happened afterward. The statistical probability of that mortality pattern, calculated by an independent researcher in 2016, was estimated at 9,000 to 1. These weren't men who died together in a single battle. They were scattered across years, across different locations, with different causes of death, and yet they were dying at a rate that defies any explanation by coincidence.
Despite the systematic suppression, the records couldn't be wiped out entirely. Ashton's research notes survived, sealed for decades inside a library. Navigator Ward's personal diary was discovered during an estate sale and ended up in a museum. Davy's letter stayed with his family for generations, and the German archives, released by European governments without fully understanding what they contained, corroborate the testimonies from a completely independent angle. The testimonies that were given independently, with no contact between the witnesses since 1918, are consistent with each other, detail after detail. The same description of the object, the same silence, the same electromagnetic interference, the same sequence of events. The truth these men documented can't be erased, it can only be ignored. But Convoy HX-17 wasn't an isolated event. What you're about to find out proves that the same thing happened in other places, at other times, and that governments didn't just classify one report, they classified a pattern, one that keeps repeating.
Between 1914 and 1918, Admiralty records, the few that have been released, contain references to at least 14 documented incidents of similar phenomena in the Atlantic and surrounding waters. In March of 1915, crews aboard 2 merchant ships reported a luminous object that emerged from the sea roughly 60 nautical miles south of Iceland. Both reports were classified within hours. One of the captains died of a stroke 2 months later. He was 39 years old. In August of 1916, 3 destroyers reported electromagnetic interference lasting 40 minutes during convoy operations in the English Channel. All navigation and communication systems failed simultaneously. The incident was attributed to a localized magnetic disturbance. No geological or atmospheric explanation was ever provided.
In November of 1917, a German submarine crew reported observing a massive luminous object that rose out of the ocean during a night patrol. The commander, Captain Wilhelm Brenner, included a detailed account in his operational log. That log was captured by British forces in 1918 and filed away. Its current classification status is unknown. The descriptions across these incidents, coming from both Allied and German sources, share consistent elements: objects of significant size, emergence from the water or descent into it, simultaneous electromagnetic interference affecting navigation and communications, complete silence, and, in every documented case, immediate classification by the corresponding military authority. The official explanations, where they exist, attribute these events to natural magnetic phenomena, equipment malfunction, or atmospheric conditions. Those explanations are presented without supporting evidence. They contradict the testimony of trained naval officers. They don't account for electromagnetic effects that have no known natural cause capable of disabling entire convoys simultaneously. They're dismissive. They're not explanatory. And they don't answer why, if these were simple misidentifications, extraordinary measures were taken to suppress the reports. Why classify observation errors? Why confiscate personal documents? Why silence the witnesses? Why, case after case, the men who reported what they saw turn up dead within months?
The naval history of World War I is documented in terms of ships lost, tonnage sunk, and lives cut short. What isn't documented is what else was in those waters, what sailors and officers were actually witnessing beneath the surface of the North Atlantic, what they reported and how it was suppressed immediately. 800 men saw what rose out of the ocean on January 16, 1918. Their captains documented it. They signed a joint report, a collective act of testimony that required every one of those 15 men to agree on what they witnessed. That report was classified within hours. The witnesses were silenced. Several were eliminated. The suppression wasn't accidental. It was systematic. It was deliberate. And it continues to this day. Researchers who dig find archives suddenly restricted. Declassification requests are denied on grounds of national security that carry no logical justification for events that happened over a century ago. Documents that should be accessible remain sealed. The suppression infrastructure put in place in 1918 is still operational. January 16, 2026 marks 108 years since what 800 men witnessed in the North Atlantic. That date has taken on a weight beyond the calendar. Declassification requests filed in 2024 reference this anniversary as a target for review. German naval archives continue to surface in European collections, and the manuscript Dr. Ashton compiled, the one that vanished from his study in 1952, has never stopped being searched for. Whether January 16, 2026 brings revelation, repetition, or simply another anniversary of suppressed truth, that remains to be seen. But for those who understand what was witnessed and what was buried, the date carries real weight. In January of 1918, over the North Atlantic, 800 men looked out from 15 ships and saw something impossible, something that shouldn't exist, something that has been systematically erased from the historical record. Those men are gone now. The last veterans of World War I passed away decades ago, but their written words remain in sealed archives, in redacted documents, in collections that most people will never access. What was documented, what was suppressed, what was followed back to the men who tried to tell someone, all of that is now part of what you know. Remember January 16th. The pattern that started in 1918 never stopped. The men who saw it tried to say something. They were silenced. But what they witnessed that night, what rose from the Atlantic, that remains. They classified it. They suppressed it. They eliminated the witnesses. But they couldn't eliminate what happened.
Hit subscribe if this video changed the way you think about what governments hide and why. Every week, I break down the events and documents that institutions don't want you to know about. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.